It's the coldest, windiest, and driest place on Earth. Its landmass is covered by ice over a mile thick, which if melted would raise the world's sea level by more than 200 feet. Its icebergs are so big they're given names, and some are hundreds of kilometers long. It's the remotest place on Earth. From the tip of South America, it takes 2 days to get here by boat across the notorious Drake Passage, considered to be the most treacherous sea in the world. Almost nothing was known about Antarctica until the first explorers reached the continent just over 100 years ago. There are only research stations here now. There are active volcanoes, almost no plant life, and no native mammals, reptiles, or amphibians. Why visit this inhospitable place? Keep watching. We arrived in Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world, after a 2.5-hour flight from Buenos Aires. We boarded a bus to our hotel where we got our first glimpse of this colorful city and its small harbor. Ushuaia is the capital of the Argentine state of Tierra del Fuego and has a population of about 80,000 inhabitants. It's one of 5 gateway cities to Antarctica. We climbed a winding road on the outskirts of town to our hotel set on a magnificent outcrop overlooking the city and harbor. The Acura is a modern 4-star hotel where we and our fellow passengers would be staying for the next 3 days. After we had settled in, we went back to town to check out the harbor and the half dozen or so cruise ships preparing to depart for Antarctica. Everyone told us the El Marino Viejo restaurant had the best seafood in town, so we decided to give it a try. It wasn't hard to find with a large crowd waiting outside. We weren't to be disappointed. And we were glad we didn't each order the king crab, which was big enough for the 2 of us. I had the local beer, named after the Beagle Channel, through which we would soon be sailing, and we talked to other travelers who had recently returned from their Antarctic adventure. Back at the hotel, we got our PCR tests and tried on our expedition jackets, which would be ours to keep. We had to supply our own waterproof pants, but polar latitudes provided boots for our landings. We passed our COVID tests and were ready to go, but as we looked outside the window, we could see that the winds were beginning to pick up. On departure day, we boarded our bus that would take us to our boat. There were a number of other ships at dock, most of them larger than the Seaventure, and we wondered how our smaller vessel would handle the infamous Drake Passage, especially now that the winds had picked up. We checked in, got our IDs and cabin assignments, and spent the afternoon in our room watching the wind gusts, which seemed to be growing stronger by the hour. We were supposed to leave the dock at 4 p.m., but were delayed due to the wind. Finally, around 8, the captain pushed off and we were on our way down the Beagle Channel. The Beagle is a 150-mile-long strait which leads to the Drake Passage and separates Argentina from Brazil at its southern end. It's a calm stretch of water, so we took the opportunity to watch Ushuaia recede from the distance. The days are long here, and we're able to take in the views until well after sunset. Above the town, we spotted our hotel, the Akura, perched on its hilltop. We gathered below for our first briefing by our expedition leader, who explained that the weather would dictate everything we did in Antarctica. Our plan A will probably never happen, he explained, and our plans B and C won't happen either. He showed us forecasts for the Drake Passage, which included wave and wind charts. I don't know if the charts served to educate or frighten us, but afterwards everybody loaded up on seasick medication before heading to their cabins for the night. We retired on our first night aboard the Seaventure, anxiously awaiting the infamous Drake. We entered the Drake after midnight, and the gentle rolling of the ship made for a very restful sleep. By breakfast, the swells, according to the ship's log, were 18 to 25 feet, and the winds were up to 50 knots. The Seaventure, however, handled the weather in stride. It took us a while to get our sea legs, and we quickly learned to anticipate the swells and using the handrails which lined the hallways of the vessel before moving about. It was comical watching the guests walk like drunken sailors down the hallway. Some people remained in their cabins, incapacitated by seasickness, but most were up and about, gathering on the fifth-floor lounge. We passed the time getting to know our fellow passengers and watching the waves through the windows. Eventually, the waves calmed, allowing us to watch seabirds such as the albatross and petrels following the wake of the boat. It was beautiful watching these giant seabirds with their wings of up to 12 feet long skimming the tops of the waves. After midnight on our third day of sailing, we rounded the South Shetland Islands. Our plan was to make Deception Island, but the weather conditions precluded a safe landing. We continued south to the Freud Passage, where we were told we would cruise in the Zodiacs. We were anxious to finally get off the boat, and the crew wasted no time in launching the inflatables. We donned our cold weather gear and boarded the 10-person boats. Even though we would not be landing on shore, we still had to go through the decontamination procedure. The Freud Passage is named after the 19th century Austrian psychologist Sigmund Freud, who, as far as I could tell, had never visited here nor contributed to its research. Such are the oddities of Antarctica. We stopped in an ice field, and our guide picked up an amazingly clear chunk of ice from the water. This ice was thousands of years old, we were told, and formed under immense pressure which drove out all of the air bubbles, making it crystal clear. It would serve to ice our cocktails later that evening. We continued our cruise that afternoon, observing fur seals and colonies of Antarctic shag, but no penguins. After dinner, we crossed the narrow Gerlache Strait to Portal Point, which would be our first landing on the Antarctic Peninsula. As we approached the shore, we could see the other passengers climbing the snowy ridgeline. We were met by a sleepy Weddell seal who was unperturbed by our presence. But still no penguins. We reached the hilltop where a banner proclaimed that we had finally made it to Antarctica, the seventh continent for many of us. We posed for the obligatory photos and remained on top as long as we could, taking in the amazing landscape. We eventually worked our way down, boarded the Zodiacs to the Seaventure, and look forward to our next adventure on the continent. We sailed that night down the Gerlache Strait and woke up the next morning off the shores of a small island named Port Lockroy. This was an old research station that was now the Penguin Post Office, the southernmost operational post office in the world. It's inhabited by 4 young women who stay here for 4.5 months each season. They do research, man the post office, and sell souvenirs to the ships making it this far south. Importantly for us, it's inhabited by a large colony of Gentoo penguins. True to form, the weather prevented us from landing at the post office, so we headed to a small island right next to it named Jugula Point. As we stepped on shore, we were greeted by several penguins who had waddled down to the water's edge to meet us. Completely unafraid of humans, they watched us curiously as we made our way to the main colony. We watched one penguin trying to steal a pebble from several nests, only to be scolded away by his potential victims. He eventually gave up and sulked away, but not before he told them exactly what he thought of them. We spent the rest of our time on Jugula, walking among the colony, taking pictures of these comical penguins. Leaving Jugala, we sailed northward through the Neumayer Passage, Lion Sound, and onto Palaver Point on Two Hummock Island. After lunch, the captain treated us to a leisurely sightseeing cruise through the narrow and picturesque Neumayer Passage. With the weather clearing, we were able to take in the breathtaking beauty Antarctica has to offer. We were amazed to see two small sailboats tacking down the channel. We shook our heads in disbelief to think that these small boats had also crossed the Drake Passage. Further on, we stopped at Lion Sound for our afternoon Zodiac cruise. Here we explored amazing icebergs, some having a deep aquatic blue color. The red wavelengths in these older icebergs with fewer air bubbles are absorbed, leaving only blue light being scattered and escaping the ice, resulting in the blue colors. As we explored these amazing icebergs, we had to keep a safe distance, as one never knew when one of these giants would decide to roll over, as one of our passengers recorded. On our way to Palaver Point, our afternoon was interrupted by a pod of orcas. A rare sight, we were told, as our expedition leader hadn't seen any of these in the last 5 years. At Palaver Point, we found a colony of noisy chinstrap penguins, named for their distinctive band around their neck. The chinstrap chicks were much older than the Gentoo chicks we had seen. These were about a month old and were ready to start replacing their own down with waterproof feathers. In about 6 weeks, they would be ready to fend for themselves. In the afternoon, we sailed to Mikkelsen Harbor, which was used by whaling vessels in the 19th century. Here we found a colony of 20,000 Gentoo penguins, busy making their stone nests and just otherwise hanging about curiously watching us strangers. The Seaventure turned about and we were once again headed south to Andvord Bay, where we were to do our first kayaking. The weather was turning colder and it began to snow as we got into our dry suits and life jackets. It definitely was not ideal weather as we took the Zodiacs out to our kayaks, and I wondered out loud if this was such a good idea.
We are nuts.
We slid into our kayaks and soon forgot about the cold as we paddled effortlessly through the icy waters. We came across a group of Gen 2s on a small iceberg and paddled over to check them out. It was uncomfortably cold, but we all agreed kayaking was one of the highlights of our trip so far. It was peacefully calm and overcast as we slowly moved through the ice pack at Paradise Harbor. This is home to the Argentinian research station, the Almirante Brown. In 1984, the station's doctor was so upset when ordered to stay here for another year, he burnt the place down. The crew launched our Zodiacs and we were soon cruising through the icy waters. The serenity of Paradise Bay was overwhelming as we pushed our way through the ice. We came across a pair of humpback whales feeding nearby. We sat in silence as we watched these magnificent animals surfacing and diving, with the sound from their blowholes echoing across the bay. They disappeared for a while, and we patiently waited, hoping they would show themselves again. But as they say, be careful what you wish for. A few moments later, a humpback surfaced not 15 feet from our boat. Not to be outdone, a group of feeding gentoo penguins appeared nearby. As we turned and slowly steamed out of Paradise Harbor, I thought to myself, this has to be one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. This is what Antarctica is all about. Our time in Antarctica was coming to a close, and we had to start heading back. Our last stop would be what was planned for our first landing, Deception Island. Deception Island is actually a caldera of an active volcano. We passed through its narrow entrance called Neptune's Bellows, protected on each side by towering basaltic cliffs. We donned our cold weather gear for the last time and prepared to go to shore at Whalers Cove. where we would find relics of an earlier, and thankfully long gone, era. Landing on the black sand beach, we discovered what looked like fog was actually steam created by the hot volcanic ground underneath. We came across two fur seals preening themselves on the beach. It's hard to think that these beautiful animals were hunted almost to extinction a century ago. All good things eventually come to an end, so we boarded the Seaventure and headed out of Whalers Bay. Now we settled in for a pleasurable 2-day trip through the Drake Passage. Even though we would now be sailing against the wind and waves, our return turned out to be much calmer than our trip over. Before long, we were once again in the Beagle Channel, this time during daylight. We again were met by petrels and the giant winged albatross. We got a nice view of the Chilean town of Puerto Williams and the cliffs surrounding the channel. We tied up to the dock in Ushuaia, and the captain said a few departing words as we thanked our amazing crew. We had a farewell dinner with friends we had met on our trip, and we spent our last night at dock aboard the Seaventure. We departed early the next morning, saying our last goodbyes to our crew.